Welcome once again. Authorities in Gaza say Israeli forces have burnt down nearly 3,000 residential units. The houses were set on fire upon clear and direct instructions from army commanders to render them uninhabitable. A statement from the government called on the international community to hold Israel accountable for ongoing crimes against the Palestinian people. Last week, Israeli media reported that army commanders had ordered soldiers to burn houses in Gaza without legal approval. The Israeli offensive in Gaza has left 85% of the population internally displaced amid acute shortages of water, food and medicine, while 60% of the enclave's infrastructure has been damaged or destroyed. In another development, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu last night rejected Hamas' proposal of a ceasefire and instead declared that total victory in Gaza is possible within months. Mr. Netanyahu said negotiations with Hamas was not going anywhere and described their terms as bizarre, but talks are continuing to try to reach some sort of deal. Hamas had proposed 3 phases in its deal. The first is a 45-day pause in fighting, during which all Israeli women, hostages, males under 19, the elderly and sick people, would be exchanged for Palestinian women and children held in Israeli jails. It also proposes a withdrawal of Israeli forces from populated areas of Gaza and the reconstruction of hospitals and refugee camps. In the proposed second phase, it proposed that the remaining male Israeli hostages would be exchanged for Palestinian prisoners and that Israeli forces leave Gaza completely. In the third phase, both sides would exchange remains and bodies. The proposed deal would also see deliveries of food and other aid to Gaza increase. By the end of the 135-day pause in fighting, Hamas says negotiations to end the war would have concluded. During his address on Wednesday night, however, the Israeli Prime Minister said negotiations with Hamas were not going anywhere and describes their terms as bizarre. In the meantime, a delegation is in Cairo, Egypt, as Hamas attempts to revive ceasefire talks. There's growing international alarm ahead of an anticipated Israeli operation into Rafah, a southern Gaza city where millions of people are living in tents. The Norwegian Refugee Council has warned Israel against expanding its operations into Rafah, saying it would be fatal for displaced civilians and humanitarian aid. The U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, today left the Middle East after voicing optimism that there's still room to reach a deal to free hostages held by Hamas and pause the fighting in Gaza. He had said Hamas' proposal creates space for agreements to be reached, despite containing what he called some clear non-starters. Mr. Blinken has been to Saudi Arabia, Egypt and Qatar, where the meetings focus on ensuring that we can use any pause to continue to build our plans for the day after in Gaza, the security, humanitarian, reconstruction, governance. While staying in the Middle East, the U.S. drone strikes in Baghdad, Iraq, have killed a senior commander of an Iran-backed militia. A leader of Kataib Hezbollah and 2 of his guards were in a vehicle when it was targeted in the east of the Iraqi capital. All 3 of them died. The Pentagon said the commander was responsible for directing attacks on American forces in the region. The U.S. linked the militia to a drone attack in Jordan that killed 3 U.S. troops last month. In the wake of the attack, Kataib Hezbollah said it was suspending attacks on American troops to prevent embarrassment to the Iraqi government. Let's take you back to our top story, where Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu last night rejected Hamas' proposal of a ceasefire and instead declared that total victory in Gaza is possible within months. Mr. Netanyahu said negotiations with Hamas was not going anywhere and described their terms as bizarre, but talks are continuing to try to reach some sort of a deal. Hamas had proposed 3 phases in its deal. The first Hamas is a 45-day pause in fighting, during which all Israeli women hostages, males under 19, the elderly and sick, will be exchanged for Palestinian women and children held in Israeli jails. It also proposes a withdrawal of Israeli forces from populated areas of Gaza and the reconstruction of hospitals and refugee camps. In the meantime, Hamas is attempting to revive ceasefire talks today as a delegation is in Cairo. There's growing international alarm ahead of an anticipated Israeli operation into Rafah, a southern Gaza city where millions of people are already living in tents. Now we want to bring in a political and international relations analyst, Professor Femi Otubanjo. Thanks for joining us on the program today.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Right, so why will this deal not have worked for Israel? Professor,
well, I'm not sure that are we communicating some sort of.
I was asking, why do you think this deal would not really have worked, for Israel, the exchange of prisoners and the ceasefire talks?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I can hear you.
Oh my. Hello?
Hello, I can hear you, Professor. Please continue.
Yes. Okay. Looking through. Yes, looking through the proposal by Hamas. They appear to be extreme. I think the President of the United States described it as over the top. The interesting thing is that Hamas appears to be making demands as if it has the upper hand in the war in Gaza. And why is it doing so? It's asking for 135 days truce, structured into 45 days each, and making all kinds of demands, including, indeed, Israel committing itself to the rebuilding of Gaza. The reality, of course, is that Hamas is playing on the weakness of Netanyahu and his government. This is what is happening. It's still playing on the domestic politics of Israel. Israel is a democracy, and Hamas is exploiting that. It's trying to squeeze Israel because the issue of hostages is one of the central issues in Israel today. Government will stand or fall on the basis of the success or failure to get those hostages released. In the first place, Netanyahu was in a weak position before the war because that incursion into Israel by Hamas has been blamed on the weakness of his government. And they are still going to come to that after the war is over. Now, the hostages, the Hamas is using the hostages to hold Israel, and to think that and really what they are doing is to bring Netanyahu down, because they know that Netanyahu will never accept those conditions.
And when you go through the proposal, really, Professor, there's so much requirement from the Israeli forces, but it shows no commitment by Hamas and no action plans indicating Hamas will stop building tunnels, as the Israeli officials claim, and stop attacking Israel.
Well, there's nothing unusual about that. When you go into a negotiating table, you go at polar positions. Hamas, we have seen Hamas's proposal. We have not seen Israel's response. All that we have heard is that Israel, on the surface, thinks that the Hamas proposals are preposterous. So we don't know what Israel is bringing on the table. So we should not put too much emphasis or lay too much emphasis on the content and extremities of Hamas's proposal. It's just a negotiating position, and Hamas does not expect that Israel will take everything en bloc. Expects some negotiations to take place.
And the plan is to reduce the number of casualties as the result of the war. to allow delivery of aid. Do you think one of the reasons the Israeli government has rejected this deal is because it suspects Hamas will use this opportunity to regroup and re-strategize against Israel? Professor, I was asking...
some kind of pause in the fighting would, in fact, undermine Israel's commitment. The strategic objective of Israel is to destroy Hamas. And if you give Hamas 45 days in the first instance, it will regroup. It will rearm itself. It will put itself in a position to make it difficult for Israel to destroy it. It will, in fact, put more burden on the Israeli war effort. That is number one. So there's no way Israel will accept that unless Israel abandons its own strategic objective. And as long as it wants to destroy Hamas, it will not give that kind of pulse to enable Hamas to strengthen itself and to be able to fight back. As it is, Israel is having a lot of difficulties achieving its objective. The war is now gone into almost 3 months, and it cannot claim that it has achieved 60% of what it set out to achieve. To now create an opportunity for a respite for Hamas will be to be digging the graves of our own soldiers.
And the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has just left the Middle East. He also rejected the proposal by Hamas, describing some of the points as a non-starter. However, a Hamas delegation is in Cairo to further discuss a ceasefire. You know, so I'm asking you this: what could be a proposal acceptable to both sides?
Well, I don't think Israel wants a long ceasefire, a long pause in the war. I don't think it wants that. And of course, you do not expect it to commit itself to the rebuilding of Gaza. It does not want Hamas to be part of the governance of Gaza. And by this proposal, Hamas is still seeing itself as the party to go back and govern Gaza, because it's saying, look, you have to have free movement in Gaza. You have to allow to rebuild homes and so on. So Hamas is still talking as if it's going to be the success of state organization when the war ends. But that is exactly the opposite of what Israel wants. And that's why there's no meeting point right now. But I'm sure that with the intervention of Arab states like Egypt and Qatar, some agreement may be reached, or the whole thing might just fall flat.
And there continues to be a call for ceasefire, given the suffering going on in Gaza. But apart from calling for the obvious, do you think that Arab leaders' intervention has had any impact on the war?
It has had some. I've just talked about Qatar, and Hamas delegation is in Egypt. Those Arab states that are the foreign minister of Qatar has been very active and working with Antony Blinken of the United States to forge some of these concessions. The Emir of Qatar has given full support. You know, Qatar happens to be one of the major sponsors of Hamas in terms of providing funds for Gaza. So I'm not sure what the others are doing, but I think there's an Arab consensus that some arrangements should be worked out, some peaceful solutions should be found, because definitely nobody is happy about the destruction and the humanitarian catastrophe that is unfolding before our very eyes in the region. So I can imagine that the Arabs must be given all the support and that Qatar and Egypt are so simply the frontline countries that are handling the negotiations. I'm not sure. There's always more to do in any situation. I think the Arab leaders can do more to put pressure on both sides to see whether an accommodation can be worked out.
Right. Professor of Political and International Relations, Femi Odubanjo, thank you so much for your time today on the program.
Thank you very much for having me.